The common perception of Sith power, shaped by the Galactic Empire's reign, is often narrowly focused on two iconic figures: the political machinations of Darth Sidious and the raw, emotional fury of Darth Vader, a view that, while not incorrect, is profoundly limited, for it mistakes the apex of Sith influence for the entirety of its terrifying potential, ignoring the vast, dark tapestry of power woven by masters across millennia. Figures whose command of the dark side was not merely a means to an end, but a transformative, galaxy-altering force in its own right. And it is this true, deeper legacy of the Sith that demands exploration, to move beyond the cinematic finale and delve into the ancient and often forgotten eras where true darkness festered and grew. The true legacy of the Sith lies not in a single reign of terror, but in the vast and terrifying power wielded by figures from different epochs, who mastered the dark side in ways that were uniquely destructive, intellectually formidable, and profoundly influential, each embodying a different facet of the dark side's ultimate promise of absolute power. To understand this legacy is to meet the architects of the Sith's very philosophy, the beings who transcended mortality itself, and the vessels of pure annihilation. We must turn to the strategic brilliance and dual nature of Revan, the immortal and planet-consuming hunger of Vitiate, the revolutionary ideology of Darth Bane, the unnatural scientific manipulation of Darth Plagueis, the ancient sorcery of Exar Kun, the unrelenting warrior spirit of Darth Malgus, and most terrifying of all, the devastating triumvirate of pure ruin: Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger; Darth Sion, the Lord of Pain; and Darth Traya, the Lord of Betrayal. These are the lords who defined darkness before the Skywalker saga, whose power set the stage for the Empire's rise, and whose individual mastery of the Force often eclipsed that of the more famous Sith in both scope and sheer terror, revealing that the dark side's greatest threat was never confined to a single throne or a mechanized suit, but was a pervasive, evolving cancer that has taken many forms throughout history, each more frightening than the last. The foundation of the Sith Empire, its philosophies, and its very survival across centuries of obscurity were not accidents of history, but the deliberate creations of singular, monstrous intellects, individuals whose power was measured not only in the fleets they commanded or the worlds they broke, but in the indelible scars they left upon the fabric of the Force itself. These were the architects, the master strategists who viewed the galaxy as a game of Disharak and moved planets and populations as their pieces. Their legacy so profound that every Sith Lord who followed, including the vaunted Palpatine, was merely building upon, or reacting to, the foundations they had poured in blood and darkness. To speak of Revan is to speak of a paradox, a schism in the Force made manifest in a single being, a figure whose name became synonymous with both ultimate betrayal and ultimate redemption, a legend so potent that it echoed for millennia, inspiring both Jedi and Sith long after his physical form had turned to dust. His power was not a monolith, but a multifaceted diamond, cut with the precision of a military genius, polished by the dark side, and yet somehow reflecting light from its deepest facets, a complexity that neither Darth Vader's brutal simplicity nor Emperor Palpatine's pure malice could ever hope to embody. His journey began, as so many Sith stories do, within the halls of the Jedi Order. Yet even there, he was set apart, a prodigy not merely in lightsaber combat or Force manipulation, but in strategic thought. He saw the galaxy not as a static painting of light and dark, but as a dynamic, evolving system. And when the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders began their bloody, expansionist campaign, Revan saw the Jedi Council's cautious, non-interventionist stance for what it was: a path to irrelevance and ultimate defeat. His unique philosophy that action in defense of others was the true duty of a Force sensitive, even if it meant embracing the passion and emotion the Jedi forbade, led him to break from the Council, taking a vast number of Jedi Knights and Republic soldiers with him to form the Revanchists, a movement that would ultimately turn the tide of the war. It was here that his first great power was revealed. Not the power to choke a single foe or summon lightning, but the power to inspire, to command absolute loyalty, to weave a narrative so compelling that thousands would willingly follow him into the heart of the unknown regions and certain death. This charisma, this ability to bend the will of others to his own through sheer force of personality and conviction, was a dark side ability far more subtle and ultimately more devastating than any display of overt power. His fall was not a stumble, but a calculated descent, triggered by a confrontation with a darkness so ancient and vast it would have shattered a lesser being. During the war, he and his loyal friend, Malak, pursued the Mandalorian forces to the outer rim world of Malachor V, a world already steeped in dark side energy. And there, in the aftermath of a cataclysmic battle that saw the activation of a super weapon that killed millions, Revan sought answers. He journeyed deeper into the unknown regions, drawn by a malevolent force, and there he found the source of the Mandalorian aggression. The Sith Emperor, Vitiate. The encounter was not a battle of blades, but of wills. And though Revan was perhaps the most powerful Jedi of his age, he was mentally overwhelmed by Vitiate's ancient cosmic power. Vitiate did not simply defeat Revan. He broke him and then remade him, reforging the Jedi hero into a Sith Lord, a vessel for Vitiate's own will. Yet even in this subjugation, Revan's unique strength was revealed, for he did not become a mindless puppet. Instead, he absorbed the Sith Emperor's knowledge, his teachings, his philosophies, and merged them with his own brilliant military mind, emerging as Darth Revan, a new kind of Sith, a strategic mastermind with the power of an ancient empire behind his eyes. As a Dark Lord, Revan's power was terrifying in its completeness. He commanded the Force with the ease of a maestro, conducting an orchestra. His lightsaber skills were unmatched, but these were mere tools. His true weapon was his intellect. He built a Sith empire from the ground up, crafting its war machine, its doctrines, and its symbols. He wielded his armies with a genius that conquered vast swaths of the Republic, and he did it all while fighting the lingering shreds of his former self, the ghost of the man he was that Vitiate could not entirely erase. This internal conflict, this duality, was the source of his ultimate power, a perspective granted by having stood atop both the Jedi Temple and the Sith throne. He understood the light not as an abstract enemy, but as a former home. And he understood the dark not as a mere source of strength, but as a tactical instrument. This made him unpredictable, brilliant, and nearly unstoppable. His legacy, however, was cemented not in his conquest, but in his redemption. Captured by the Jedi Order in a desperate ambush, his mind was wiped, his identity stripped away, and he was reprogrammed as a Republic soldier. This set the stage for one of the most remarkable journeys in galactic history. The amnesiac Revan, guided by the Force, set out to discover his own past, and in doing so, he walked the path of a Jedi once more, but this time with the knowledge, buried deep within him, of the Sith. He faced his former apprentice, Darth Malak, and defeated him, not through overwhelming dark side power, but through a synthesis of his training and his inherent nature. He was offered the chance to reclaim his Sith Empire, to become the Dark Lord again, yet he chose the light, proving his mastery was not of one side of the Force, but of the Force itself. His power lay in understanding the whole, in seeing the balance, and in his ability to choose his path, a freedom that most Sith, enslaved by their own passions, never truly possess. Revan's legacy is that of the ultimate synthesis, a being of immense power whose true strength was a profound, hard-won wisdom that transcended simplistic notions of light and dark. If Revan was the brilliant strategist, the charismatic leader who wielded power, then Vitiate was power itself, a cosmic parasite, a black hole in the living Force, whose existence was an affront to life itself. His power was so absolute, so ancient, and so utterly divorced from mortal concerns that he makes Emperor Palpatine's 3-decade rule seem like a brief, Fleeting tantrum. Palpatine sought to rule the galaxy. Vitiate sought to consume it, to transcend it, to become a god in a universe of insects. And for over 1,000 years, he very nearly succeeded. His story is not one of battles and wars, though he fought many, but of a millennia-long game of cultivation and harvest, where entire civilizations were merely crops to be nurtured and then reaped. His origin story is the stuff of pure nightmare. Born tenebrous on the Sith world of Medrius, later renamed Nathana, in honor of the horror it would witness. He was the son of the Sith Lord Markarangos, and from a young age, his power was evident. But power in the Sith Empire of old was a chaotic, self-cannibalizing thing. The Brotherhood of Darkness was a rabble of warring lords whose incessant infighting weakened them all. The young Vitiate, then known as Tenebrae, saw this weakness and conceived of a solution of breathtaking audacity and utter desolation. He would not simply defeat his rivals. He would remove them and every other living thing on the planet in a single apocalyptic act. Through a ritual of unspeakable Sith sorcery, he performed the unthinkable. He consumed Nathema. The ritual did not merely kill the planet's inhabitants. It devoured them, soul and spirit, drawing every ounce of life energy, every whisper of the Force, into his own being. The planet itself was left a void, a barren husk where the Force simply did not exist, a wound that would never heal. For the beings who lived there, it was a fate worse than death. Absolute, utter annihilation. For Vitiate, it was Genesis. He absorbed the life force of every man, woman, child, and creature on the world, achieving a form of immortality and power on a scale previously unimaginable. He was no longer merely a Sith Lord. He was a phenomenon, a self-sustaining vortex of dark side energy that would never age, never weaken, and could only grow stronger with further feasts. This act alone elevates him beyond any other Sith in terms of pure, destructive ritualistic power. Palpatine's Force lightning could kill a man. Vitiate's will could unmake a world. With this godlike power secured, he retreated into the shadows, establishing a hidden Sith empire in the unknown regions, far from the eyes of the decaying Republic and the squabbling Sith remnants. From his throne on Dromund Kaz, he began his long game. His reign was not one of constant warfare, but of patient, meticulous manipulation spanning centuries. He was the puppet master for whom generations were but brief intervals. He would extend his immense will across the galaxy, influencing events, guiding dark side acolytes, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His confrontation with Revan and Malak was not a desperate defense, but a curiosity, a test of a promising new tool. When his first empire was ultimately revealed and defeated in the Great Galactic War, it was merely a setback, a single piece sacrificed in a much larger game. His true masterpiece was yet to come. Centuries later, he would embody himself once more, not as the Sith Emperor, but as the seemingly benevolent immortal emperor of the completely separate Zakul Empire. Under the identity of Valkorian, here, his genius was on full display. He built a society from scratch that worshipped him as a god, supported by an invincible military force of knights and skytroopers. He created the Eternal Fleet, an automated armada of unimaginable power that could enforce his will across the galaxy without a single living crewman to question his orders. As Valkorian, he presented himself as a wise, detached ruler, a father to his people, all while his true self Vitiate planned the final, great ritual, the consumption of all life in the galaxy, to achieve a form of cosmic transcendence, to become the only consciousness in a dead universe. This long-term planning, the ability to play 2, then 3 simultaneous galactic roles over a 1,000-year lifespan, showcases a strategic mind that dwarfs all others. Palpatine's plan was brilliant, but it took place within a single human lifetime and relied on the political structures of his enemy. Vitiate's plan was existential, operating on a geological timescale. He did not seek to rule the government. He sought to replace the galaxy itself, His power was multifaceted. The raw, terrifying energy of a world eater, the ancient knowledge of Sith sorcery, the strategic patience of a timeless intellect, and the ultimate goal of deification. He was not a Sith Lord in the way Bane or Palpatine were. He was the ultimate embodiment of the dark side's core promise: to use the Force not as a tool, but as a meal, to break free of all chains, including mortality itself. And in doing so, he set a standard of power that is arguably the highest peak any Sith has ever reached, a monument to the terrifying potential of absolute, unrestrained hunger. The grand, sprawling empires of ancient Sith Lords like Revan and Vitiate, for all their terrifying, galaxy-shaking power and their cosmic, almost deific ambition, ultimately crumbled into dust and legend, their monumental legacies buried deep beneath the sands of time and the relentless, dogmatic march of the Jedi Order, which always seemed to rise again, like a weed refusing to be permanently eradicated. The Sith, in their traditional, multitude-based form, had proven, time and again, to be their own most formidable and insidious enemy, a chaotic, perpetually self-destructive force, seemingly doomed to fracture from within due to the very core, foundational nature of their unending, insatiable hunger for personal power and dominance, a flaw that was not a bug, but a feature of their fractured philosophy. It was from the ashes of this repeated, catastrophic failure, from the literal scorched earth of the Seventh Battle of Ruzan, that a new, radical, and brutally efficient philosophy emerged, a stark, simplifying doctrine that would ensure not just the Sith's mere survival in a galaxy that sought to erase them, but their eventual, total, and absolute victory. A victory so complete, it would see the Jedi Order nearly exterminated and the entire galactic government restructured into an instrument of pure dark side will. This new order was not built on the foundation of vast, unwieldy armies or on the performance of ancient, planet-consuming rituals, but on a single, perfect, and self-perpetuating idea, a rule so fundamental and elegant that it would guide and shape the Sith for a full millennium, its patient, inexorable logic culminating in the very galactic dominance that had eluded all the mighty, but flawed, predecessors. This critical era in Sith history was defined primarily by two towering, intellectual figures. The first, the architect of this brilliant new system, a true philosopher of the dark side who possessed the profound, cold wisdom to understand that true, enduring power required infinite patience and absolute secrecy. And the second, a revolutionary, amoral scientist who sought to bend the very fundamental, universal laws of life and death to his indomitable will, pushing the perceived boundaries of the dark side's potential into realms previously thought impossible, even blasphemous, by both Jedi and Sith alike. To understand the sheer, revolutionary genius of Darth Bane, one must first fully comprehend the pathetic, self-defeating state of the Sith Order he was born into, the so-called Brotherhood of Darkness, which waged a clumsy, direct, and ultimately futile war of attrition against the Jedi and the Galactic Republic, a war they were inevitably losing, not through a lack of individual power, for many of its members were undoubtedly mighty and fearsome in the Force, but through a critical, foundational weakness inherent in their very structure and their numbers. Their core philosophy was fatally, catastrophically flawed, for they foolishly believed in a simplistic concept of strength through multitude, in building a vast, unstable pyramid of power comprised of countless Sith Lords, masters, and acolytes, all constantly, viciously vying for a higher position on a ladder that had no true top. This inherently toxic structure created a culture of perpetual, predictable betrayal and incessant internal strife, where any perceived sign of weakness in a superior was seen not as a crisis to be managed, but as an open invitation for an ambitious subordinate to strike. This constant, draining infighting bled their resources dry, fractured their strategic focus into 1,000 competing shards, and left them perpetually vulnerable to their external enemies, who remained united in purpose. The Sith of this era were a hydra constantly, mindlessly biting its own heads, a cancer that aggressively attacked itself. They were not a unified order, but a squabbling, chaotic mob, and their inevitable final defeat at the hands of the United Jedi at the Battle of Ruzan was the last, bloody testament to their failed and unsustainable ways, the conclusive proof that a new path was not just desirable, but essential for mere survival. Darth Bane, born under the name Dessel into the brutal, soul-crushing hell of the Kurtosis mines of Apatros, was a hardened product of this broken, failing system. He rose from absolutely nothing, from a life of backbreaking labor and immense suffering, using his raw, innate strength and his ruthless, survivalist cunning to first become a soldier in the Sith army, and then, through sheer force of will and dark side potency, to ascend to the rank of Sith Lord himself within the very brotherhood he would later condemn. But where his short-sighted peers saw only the next immediate battle, the next planet to conquer, Bane possessed a deeper, more philosophical, and more historically minded intellect. He retreated into the study of the ancient Sith texts, particularly the writings and teachings of the legendary Darth Revan, and through this study, he saw the undeniable truth with a devastating, crystalline clarity. The Sith were utterly doomed to fail as long as they continued to exist in great multitudes. He realized that the dark side was not a tool for the masses. It was a focused, demanding, and intensely personal power that could only be wielded to its universe-bending potential by a supremely disciplined, select few. The incessant infighting was not an unfortunate byproduct of the Sith system. It was an inevitable, inescapable feature of their creed of passion and domination, and it would always be their ultimate downfall. At Ruzan, he witnessed the final, catastrophic act of this millennia-long tragedy, not with despair or anguish, but with a cold, calculating resolve to ensure such a failure would never, ever happen again, to forge a new path from the ashes of the old. His monumental revelation, his brilliant flash of insight, was the genesis of the Rule of Two, a doctrine he articulated with perfect, brutal simplicity. Two there should be, no more, no less. One to embody power, the other to crave it. This was not merely a directive or a suggestion. It was a revolutionary evolutionary mechanism for the entire Sith Order, a perfect solution to the ancient problem of self-destructive infighting by ingeniously making that very conflict the central, driving engine of their progress, instead of 100 Sith squabbling for meager scraps of power and influence. There would be only two, a master to possess, safeguard, and augment all the accumulated knowledge and power of the entire Sith legacy, and an apprentice to learn from them, to grow strong under their exacting tutelage, and ultimately to challenge and overthrow them, taking their place and claiming that vast power for themselves, thus ensuring that each new generation of Sith would be necessarily stronger, more cunning, and more powerful than the last, as only a more powerful, more worthy apprentice could successfully defeat a supremely powerful master. This elegant system ensured the Sith would no longer be a blunt, obvious instrument crashing uselessly against the shields of the Jedi Order. They would instead become a hidden knife, a subtle virus working patiently from within the host body of the galaxy, festering in the deepest shadows, growing stronger and more potent with each passing century, their knowledge compounding, their power concentrating into a finer and finer point, all while the Jedi, believing them utterly extinct, grew complacent, bureaucratic, and weak, their vigilance fading over the generations. This was Bane's true masterstroke. Therefore, Bane's greatest power, his most enduring legacy, was not a specific, spectacular feat of force strength, though he was undoubtedly immensely powerful, capable of crafting a terrifying living armor of orbalisks that fed him a constant stream of dark side energy and of resisting the mind-altering effects of the thought bomb deployed by the Brotherhood. His true, monumental power was intellectual, philosophical. It was the sheer, world-altering power of a perfect, self-executing idea, He understood on a fundamental level that the most enduring form of power is not the ability to destroy a planet with a single gesture, but the ability to shape the future itself across a 1,000-year span. He designed a system so perfect, so self-perpetuating, and ruthlessly efficient that it guaranteed the Sith's survival and their eventual victory a full millennium before that victory was finally achieved. He sacrificed all immediate gratification for the promise of ultimate, absolute domination. He vanished from the galaxy's view entirely, taking his new apprentice, Darth Zana, and his new, perfect rule into the deepest, most impenetrable shadows, beginning a single, unbroken lineage that would patiently wait, manipulate galactic events from behind the scenes, and grow steadily stronger. His legacy is every single action Darth Sidious ever took. The entire Galactic Empire itself was the ripe fruit of the tree that Darth Bane had planted on the barren fields of Rusin. He was the ultimate architect, and his power lies in the undeniable, empirical fact that he was right. His philosophy, his rule, is the very mechanism that ultimately brought the entire galaxy to its knees. A testament to the fact that the most powerful weapon is often not a lightsaber, but a perfect idea. If Darth Bane was the grand architect of the Sith's future, the master strategist who designed the very system that would lead to their victory, then Darth Plagueis was its ultimate scientist, its most radical and visionary researcher, a man who peered into the very heart of creation itself, where other Sith Lords sought power over governments, armies, or even the minds of others. Plagueis sought a more fundamental, more profound form of dominion, absolute power over life itself, over its very essence and its cessation. He was not content with the dark side as a mere weapon or as a tool for political domination. He saw it as a natural science, a cosmic, mechanistic force to be studied, understood, broken down into its component parts, and ultimately controlled. His approach was a stark, dramatic departure from the raging emotional passions that fueled most Sith. He was a figure of cold, calculating, precise precision, a master of the most esoteric and terrifying Sith sorceries who believed, with the conviction of a fanatic, that the key to ultimate victory lay not in military might or overt control, but in transcending the very biological cycle that bound all living things, in defeating the final enemy, death itself. His power was so profound, so deeply unnatural, that it fundamentally altered the relationship between the dark side and the very fabric of reality, bringing the Sith closer to the cherished goal of true immortality than any lord had before him, arguably even surpassing the ritual-based immortality of Vitiate in its philosophical audacity. As the master to Darth Sidious, Plagueis represented the glorious, triumphant success of the Rule of Two's patient design. He was the magnificent culmination of 1,000 years of accumulated Sith knowledge, a pinnacle of refined power that his apprentice would one day be forced to overcome, thus continuing the cycle and strengthening the line. His personal driving philosophy was that the true enemy, the ultimate limitation to be conquered, was not the Jedi Order, but death itself, the great, universal equalizer to this singular end. He dedicated his entire existence to the obsessive study and manipulation of midi-chlorians, not as the Jedi understood them as benevolent, mystical mediators of the Force's will, but as purely biological building blocks to be commanded, controlled, and rearranged by a sufficiently powerful and knowledgeable will. He pioneered, through decades of gruesome experimentation and amoral research, a dark side technique of breathtaking complexity that allowed him to directly influence the midi-chlorians within living cells, not to create life from absolute nothingness, which he rightly understood remained the sole purview of the Force itself, but to manipulate its flow with the precision of a master surgeon, to prevent cells from dying and decaying, to heal even the most grievous mortal wounds, and to even, it was said, keep others alive indefinitely, trapped in an agonizing state on the very precipice of death. This was not healing in the Jedi sense, a gentle encouragement of the natural process. It was a grotesque, forced perversion of the natural order, a violent stasis that denied the fundamental will of the Force itself. His most famed and most terrifying ability was the whispered power to create life through this meticulous manipulation, to coax midi-chlorians to coalesce, to divide, and to generate new, sentient life where there was none before. A blasphemous, godlike act that positioned him as a dark creator, a mortal playing at a domain reserved for the divine. The legends, shrouded in mystery and fear, whispered that he and his supremely talented apprentice, Sidious, had together willed the very Force itself to conceive a child, a being of immense potential, an event that, if true, would have shaken the very foundations of cosmic balance and natural law. Though the exact nature of this feat remains one of the Sith's most closely guarded secrets, the very existence of the rumor speaks volumes to the awe and utter terror he inspired throughout the dark side community. His power was such that he could seemingly cheat death itself, a power he demonstrated on multiple horrifying occasions, not out of any compassion or mercy, but as a cold, clinical demonstration of his absolute mastery over the fundamental forces of biology. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that by unlocking the final secrets of preventing death, he could achieve perfect, eternal immortality for himself, thus becoming the eternal Sith Master, forever guiding the Order from the shadows, a living, undying embodiment of the dark side's ultimate promise of power. This scientific, almost clinically detached approach to ultimate power is what makes Darth Plagueis uniquely and profoundly dangerous in the annals of Sith history. He was not a straightforward warrior like Malgus, whose rage could be met and potentially countered with a stronger blade or a more clever strategy. Nor was he purely a military strategist like Revan, whose complex plans could be potentially unraveled by a cunning opponent. He was instead a biologist of the cosmic, a physicist of the soul. His battlefield was the microscopic, unseen world within all living things, and his primary weapon was a knowledge so deep, so esoteric, and so utterly unnatural that it threatened the very core concepts of life and death. His power was the power of limitless potential, the whispered nightmare of what could be possible if the dark side's deepest secrets were ever fully unlocked and harnessed. His experiments pushed the very boundaries of the possible, and his ultimate goal, personal, scientific immortality, was the logical, terrifying endpoint of the Sith's ancient desire for absolute power, a goal that even the mighty Vitiate had only achieved through a horrific, large-scale ritual of mass death, while Plagueis sought it through focused, precise, and controlled manipulation at the cellular level, a arguably more sophisticated and insidious method. His legacy, however, is also a profound testament to the ultimate, ironic paradox of the rule of two, which he himself served. For all his immense, godlike power over the forces of life, he could not, in the end, prevent his own sudden, conviolent death. His apprentice, Darth Sidious, learned his lessons too well, absorbed his teachings too completely. Sidious understood the magnificent power Plagueis sought, and coveting it for himself alone, he struck at the moment of his master's greatest perceived vulnerability. In his sleep, Sidious stole that power for himself, ending his master's life not in a grand, glorious duel of force lightning and clashing lightsabers, but in a silent, brutal, and utterly efficient act of betrayal that perfectly, tragically encapsulated the very rule they both served. Plagueis's great tragedy was that he became the ultimate victim of the very system designed to create such immense power. Yet his influence did not die with him. His teachings, his groundbreaking research into the deepest secrets of cheating death, became the entire foundation for his apprentice's own subsequent efforts. Sidious's own desperate quest to cheat death in the aftermath of his physical defeat at Endor was a direct, logical continuation of Plagueis's life's work. Thus, the immense power and the terrifying vision of Darth Plagueis lived on, a ghost in the machine of the Sith grand plan, his name a whisper, representing the most terrifying ambition of all, to hold the power of life and death in one's own hands, and to never, ever let go, to become the master of existence itself. The grand, intricate designs of Sith philosophers like Darth Bane and the unnatural, blasphemous sciences practiced by a lord such as Darth Plagueis represent a calculated, almost coldly intellectual approach to the embrace of darkness, a path defined by patient manipulation, long-term strategic planting, and a desire to shape the galaxy through control and order, albeit a brutal, tyrannical order. Yet to believe this represents the entirety of the dark side's nature is a profound misunderstanding. At its absolute, unfiltered core, the dark side is not a tool for measured ascension or controlled domination. It is a primal, chaotic force of pure, unadulterated annihilation, a cosmic cancer that seeks only to consume, to break, to corrupt, and to reduce the vibrant tapestry of creation back to silent, empty nothingness. This fundamental, terrifying truth found its most potent and absolute expression not within the borders of a sprawling empire, nor within the secretive confines of a two-member lineage, but in a brief, incredibly cataclysmic period of such profound, galaxy-wide suffering that it scarred the very fabric of the Force itself, giving birth to abominations who are less like men and more akin to sentient natural disasters, forces of nature given a voice and a will. This was the era of the Sith Triumvirate, a fragile, temporary alliance of three Dark Lords who emerged from the apocalyptic, soul-scarring aftermath of the Jedi Civil War, each embodying a different, extreme facet of ultimate ruin, not through the deployment of vast armies or the execution of complex political schemes, but through the very nature of their transformed existence. They were not rulers of galaxies, but were, instead, lords of emptiness, priests of the void, and their unique power, while often lacking the strategic longevity or political permanence of other Sith, represents the dark side in its most concentrated, horrific, and conceptually terrifying form, a benchmark for raw, destructive potential and philosophical nihilism that has never been equaled in the annals of galactic history. Political schemes, but through the very nature of their transformed existence. They were not rulers of galaxies, but were, instead, lords of emptiness, priests of the void, and their unique power, while often lacking the strategic longevity or political permanence of other Sith, represents the dark side in its most concentrated, horrific, and conceptually terrifying form, a benchmark for raw, destructive potential and philosophical nihilism that has never been equaled in the annals of galactic history. The term triumvirate implies a shared goal, a common purpose, a unified front. But for Darth Nihilus, Darth Sion, and Darth Traya, their short-lived alliance was one of sheer, temporary, mutual convenience, a fragile and tense pact between three diametrically opposed forces of nature that were fundamentally, philosophically incompatible. Each was a unique, monstrous response to the immense pain, death, and loss of life unleashed by the wars of Revan and Malak, each so utterly transformed by their exposure to unparalleled suffering that they transcended their humanity entirely, becoming living, breathing embodiments of the dark side's most extreme and terrifying promises: infinite, insatiable hunger, unkillable eternal pain, and absolute, transcendent betrayal. Together, they did not seek to build a new Sith order or a new galactic government. Their goal was purely and simply to tear down the existing structures of the universe, to visit upon the galaxy the same profound emptiness they felt festering within themselves. And in doing so, they demonstrated a spectrum of power so extreme, so focused on annihilation, that it borders on the apocalyptic, setting a standard for what it means to be a vessel of pure dark side energy, devoid of any of the trappings of conventional ambition or desire. To speak of Darth Nihilus is to struggle with language itself, for he was less a being and more a concept given a dreadfully tangible form. He was, quite simply, the most purely, singularly destructive entity ever to be classified as a Sith Lord, existential threat on a scale that dwarfs the ambitions of even the most power-hungry emperors. His origins are forever rooted in the absolute worst single moment of the Mandalorian Wars. The activation of the mass shadow generator superweapon at Malachor V, an event engineered by Revan that did not merely kill millions of living beings in an instant, but in a very real way, murdered the Force itself and that entire region of space, creating a void, a silence in the cosmic chorus where once there had been life. Nihilus was present on the planet's surface during this cataclysm, likely a Jedi Knight or Padawan, and was caught directly in the epicenter of this cosmic atrocity. But unlike the countless others who perished, he did not die. Instead, the vacuum of death and loss, the sheer, screaming void of energy created by the weapon, filled him, or rather, it replaced him entirely, scouring away his identity, his memories, his very soul. He became a wound in the Force, not like Vitiate, who consciously created one through a horrific ritual, but a being who was the wound itself, a sentient, starving black hole in the fabric of reality, a paradox given a voice. His power was terrifyingly singular, all-consuming, and simple in its horrific purpose. He hungered. This was not a metaphor for ambition. It was a physiological and spiritual necessity, an unending compulsion that defined his every action. He fed on the Force itself, the life force that binds the galaxy together, and the only way to sat his endless escalating appetite was to consume it from other living things. Initially, this meant draining individual Force sensitives, a horrific fate that left them as empty, lifeless husks. But he quickly grew beyond such meager sustenance. His power scaled to a level previously unimaginable and never replicated. He learned to target his hunger at a planetary scale. From the bridge of his ghostly flagship, the Ravager, he could unleash a wave of absolute nothingness, a silent scream of negation that would sweep across an entire world, extinguishing every single trace of life, every animal, every plant, every sentient being, not by killing them through violence, but by devouring their very connection to the Force, their life essence, leaving behind not corpses, but perfectly preserved, empty, silent husks, as if nothing had ever lived there at all. The planet was scoured of life, yet its cities stood untouched, a monument to the most complete form of genocide imaginable. The planet Qatar, home to a large gathering of the Miraluka, a species naturally and deeply strong in the Force, was his most infamous feast. He consumed the entire world, its population, its wildlife, its very spirit, in an instant, an act of gastronomy on a genocidal scale that echoed through the Force as a moment of pure terror. This power makes Nihilus arguably the most immediately and overwhelmingly dangerous being in all of Sith history, for he required no army, no complex strategy, no lengthy preparation, only a target and a moment of focus. His strength was also his ultimate, tragic weakness, for his hunger defined him completely. It erased whatever he had been before, leaving behind no personality, no goals, no ambition, no joy or sorrow, only the next meal. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of consumption, but one that could be outmaneuvered by a cunning foe. His connection to the physical world was maintained through his mask and robes, which acted as anchors containing the terrifying void that was his essence. And his feeding was a specific ritual that could be disrupted or reflected. Ultimately, he was defeated by the Jedi exile, Mitra Surik, herself a unique wound in the Force, who had voluntarily severed her own connection to survive the Malachor event. Because Nihilus's power was specifically to consume the Force, he could not comprehend or feed on something that presented no Force presence to consume. She was, in a sense, invisible to him, and then poison. His story is the ultimate tragedy of the dark side, the pursuit of power so absolute that it utterly destroys the pursuer, leaving behind only the mindless, ravenous power itself, forever hungry and forever alone. If Nihilus represents the dark side's ultimate power to consume others, then Darth Sion represents its terrifying power to sustain the self through sheer, Unending, agonizing agony. His is a power not of conquest or domination, but of grim, horrifying persistence. A form of immortality built on a foundation of exquisite, perpetual suffering. Sion's physical body is a walking testament to his power, a shattered, broken form that should have died 1,000 times over from its accumulated injuries. His skin is a cracked mosaic of scars and necrotic tissue. His bones are perpetually fractured and refractured. His flesh is torn and bruised, yet he does not die. He holds his body together through a continuous, unimaginable act of pure will, fueled purely by his bottomless hatred, his immense pain, and his absolute refusal to yield to death's embrace. He is, quite literally, too angry, too hate-filled to die. His power is a raw, brutal, and direct expression of the Sith Code's declaration that through passion, one gains strength. Sion's all-consuming passion is his hatred for life itself, for the pain it has inflicted upon him, and for the Jedi Order, which represents the light side's concepts of order, peace, and healing which he finds abhorrent. Every single moment of his existence is a conscious, grinding act of defiance against death, a constant, draining effort to force his broken body to obey his will through a never-ending torrent of dark side energy. This makes him a uniquely terrifying and psychologically devastating opponent in combat. He feels no pain as a limitation. Instead, he processes it as a source of power, a catalyst for his rage. He can take injuries that would instantly kill any other being: disembowelment, decapitation, dismemberment, and simply keep fighting, his body crumbling and reforming through dark side energy, but never failing. He is the ultimate zombie, a relentless, unstoppable force of pure hatred that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with, and cannot be stopped by any conventional means of combat. To fight Sion is not to fight a man, but to fight pain itself, to struggle against the very concept of suffering, given a sword and a will to use it. Yet, like Nihilus, his magnificent power is also his inescapable prison. His hard-won immortality is not a gift, but an eternal curse. He is trapped in a broken, agonized body, experiencing constant, excruciating pain, forever denied the sweet release of death. He serves Darth Traya, not out of loyalty or shared ambition, but because he believes she alone holds the ancient Sith knowledge to truly, finally kill him, to grant him the peace he secretly, desperately craves. His ultimate defeat comes not from being overpowered in a physical sense. He is functionally unkillable, but from having his will, the very engine of his existence, shattered. The Jedi exile does not shatter his body. It is already shattered. Instead, she shatters his will to continue. Through force of her own example and through philosophical argument, she shows him the truth, that his hatred is empty, that his suffering is ultimately self-inflicted and self-sustaining, and that his endless war is meaningless. She convinces him to finally, willingly let go, to release his grip on life. And in that moment of acceptance, his power fails, and his body at last, gratefully, crumbles into a pile of dust. Sion's power is a terrifying lesson in the dark side's ability to create a living hell, a state of eternal torment that masquerades as strength, but is, in reality, the deepest form of weakness and slavery. The intellectual, philosophical, and strategic core of the triumvirate was Darth Traya, formerly the Jedi Master Kriya, a figure of immense, nuanced, and profound power whose ambitions dwarfed the mere hunger of Nihilus or the painful existence of Sion. Her power was not located in the brute force application of the dark side, but in her supreme, unparalleled mastery of manipulation, foresight, and philosophical insight. She was a grand strategist, a puppeteer who viewed the entire galaxy as an intricate web of connections, influences, and potentialities, and she possessed the unique ability to pull on a single, precise thread to make the entire web tremble and collapse according to her design. Her goal was not conquest or consumption, but the execution of the most radical, heretical idea in all of Star Wars history: the complete and total destruction of the Force itself, the silencing of the cosmic symphony that bound all life together. Tria's complex philosophy was born from a deep, abiding hatred not of the Jedi or the Sith as institutions, but of the Force's perceived tyranny over all living things. She saw the Force not as a benevolent energy field, but as a manipulative, sentient entity that controlled the destiny of every being in the galaxy, forcing them into a perpetual, meaningless, and destructive cycle of light versus dark, Jedi versus Sith, a cycle that created endless suffering, war, and intellectual stagnation. She witnessed the failures and hypocrisies of both orders firsthand, cast out by the Jedi Council for her controversial, manipulative teachings, and later by her own Sith apprentices for her refusal to embrace their simplistic, direct hunger for power, and came to believe that the only path to true free will for all galactic beings was to sever the galaxy's connection to the Force entirely, to create a universe of absolute silence where people could shape their own destinies through their own choices and strengths, free from the influence of this cosmic parent that dictated their lives. Her power was a direct reflection of this grand philosophy. She was an absolute master of Force bonds, able to see, manipulate, and even sever the invisible threads of energy that connected all living things. This allowed her to craft intricate, multi-layered plans that unfolded over years, positioning people like pieces on a massive dejarik board to achieve her ends without them ever realizing they were being played. She could feed on the echoes of powerful Force events, gaining knowledge, strength, and insight from the pain and death of others. Her mastery of Mechu Deru, the rare Force ability to manipulate and interface with technology, allowed her to control droids, computers, and even starships with her mind alone. But her most terrifying ability was her preternatural skill as a teacher and a corrupter. She was able to perceive the deepest weaknesses, secret desires, and hidden fears of others, and use them with surgical precision to turn allies against each other, to breed doubt, distrust, and ultimately, betrayal. She believed that betrayal was the purest expression of free will, a conscious choice to put one's own interests above all bonds of loyalty or affection. And thus she cultivated it in everyone she met, seeing it as a beautiful, if painful, lesson. In direct lightsaber combat, she was devastatingly effective, famously wielding 3 lightsabers telekinetically in a floating circle around her, while simultaneously employing powerful Force abilities, a style that was as elegant as it was lethal. But physical confrontation was always a last resort for her, a failure of her greater, more subtle plans. Her true power was always intellectual and philosophical. She sought to use the Jedi exile, another wound in the Force, as a catalyst to create an echo in the Force, so powerful it would reverberate backwards and forwards in time, killing the Force itself across the entire galaxy. Much like a loud noise can create a feedback loop that shatters a speaker, while she was ultimately defeated by the very pupil she sought to use as her weapon. Her legacy endures as the most philosophically powerful and complex of any Sith, for she alone looked at the source of all power in the galaxy, the foundation of both the Jedi and Sith orders, and declared it the ultimate enemy. Her ambition was not to rule the galaxy, but to free it from the very concept that gave her power, a profound paradox that makes her one of the most fascinating, intelligent, and dangerously visionary figures to ever embrace the dark side. Beyond the grand strategists who shaped empires and the philosophical nihilists who sought to unmake reality itself, the history of the Sith is also written in the blood of conquest and the echoes of forgotten, terrifying magic. This lineage is defined by figures of immense personal power, masters of the blade and the arcane, whose strength was not in the subtle manipulation of events over centuries, but in the immediate, overwhelming application of force, in the singular moment of conflict where will and power decide fate. These Sith were the instruments of the dark side's wrath, the unyielding warriors who broke armies and the sorcerers who commanded forces beyond the understanding of mere warriors. Their power, while sometimes lacking the far-reaching impact of a Bane or a Vitiate, represents the dark side in its most visceral, terrifyingly personal form, a testament to the individual potential for destruction that lies within the embrace of passion and hatred. They are the embodiment of the Sith as the galaxy most commonly fears them, unstoppable engines of ruin, whose passage leaves only ashes and legends of terror. Long before the rule of two condensed Sith power into a single lineage, in an era known as the Golden Age of the Sith, the dark side was a wild, untamed wellspring of knowledge and power. Its secrets explored not in shadows, but in the open. Its practitioners seeking mastery over forces that would later be considered too dangerous even for the Sith. The greatest of these early masters was Exar Kun, a figure who embodied not just martial prowess, but a deep, scholarly dedication to the most esoteric and corrupting arts of the dark side. His power was not merely that of a warrior, but of a sorcerer king, a researcher who plumbed the depths of forbidden knowledge and emerged transformed, a being whose command over life, death, and the very fabric of reality made him a threat of an entirely different, more ancient order. Exar Kun's path to power began, as did Revan's, within the Jedi Order. He was a prodigy, a brilliant and charismatic student whose hunger for knowledge was matched only by his natural affinity for the Force. However, where the Jedi Council preached caution and balance, Kun saw limitation and cowardice. His thirst for understanding led him to seek out knowledge wherever it could be found, disregarding the arbitrary boundaries set by his masters. This path inevitably led him to the ancient Sith worlds, to tombs and libraries long sealed away by the Jedi, filled with artifacts humming with forgotten power. It was here, on the jungle moon of Yavin 4, that he encountered the spirit of the long-dead Dark Lord of the Sith, Freeden Nad, a malevolent presence that began his corruption, seducing him with promises of power and knowledge beyond the narrow teachings of the Jedi. His fall was not a sudden plunge, but a gradual, willing descent into obsession. He embraced the Sith teachings not as a means to an end, but as the ultimate end itself, the pursuit of absolute power through absolute knowledge. His transformation was cemented when he traveled to the distant Sith world of Korriban, and later to the frozen tomb world of Ziost, where he willingly subjected himself to an ancient Sith initiation ritual. During this ritual, he was bombarded with the accumulated dark side energy of 1,000 generations of Sith Lords, an onslaught that would have annihilated a weaker will, at which Exar Kun not only survived, but absorbed, emerging as a new Dark Lord of the Sith, reborn and infinitely more powerful, his eyes blazing with yellow fire, his body a vessel for ancient, terrible power. Exar Kun's true power lay in his mastery of Sith magic and alchemy, arts that would later be largely forgotten or dismissed by later Sith like Bane and Sidious, who favored political control and personal dominance. Kun was a master of Sith sorcery, capable of performing rituals that could alter reality itself. He could create illusions so powerful they were physically tangible, summon storms of dark side energy, and craft artifacts of immense power, such as his own double-bladed lightsaber, a weapon that was a rarity at the time. But his most terrifying applications of power were in the field of Sith alchemy. He learned to warp and corrupt living flesh, creating terrible monsters and mutants that served his will. He crafted war beasts for his armies, and even learned the secrets of binding spirits to objects, granting them a form of eternal, tormented life. Perhaps his most stunning demonstration of power was his actions at the height of the Great Sith War, when, facing certain defeat at the hands of a combined Jedi and Republic fleet, he performed his ultimate ritual. Rather than be captured or killed, he gathered his Massassi warriors within the great temples of Yavin 4 and performed a ritual of unimaginable scale and horror. He drained the life force from every single one of his followers, every man, woman, and child of the Massassi race, consuming their very souls to fuel his own transcendence. The ritual killed his entire people instantly, But it worked. It tore his spirit from his physical body and fused it with the dark side energy of the temple itself, allowing him to exist as a purely spiritual entity. A dark side ghost bound to the ruins of Yavin 4 for 4,000 years, his consciousness preserved, able to influence events, manipulate visitors, and even possess the weak-willed. This form of immortality, achieved through an act of unparalleled betrayal and mass sacrifice, is a testament to a different kind of power, one based on a deep, scholarly, and utterly ruthless understanding of the darkest arts of the Force, a power that allowed him to cheat death itself, not through cloning or essence transfer, but through sheer, sorcerous will. In stark contrast to the scholarly, arcane power of Exar Kun stands Darth Malgus, a being who represents the dark side in its most raw, brutal, and unrefined form. If Kun was a master of the subtle arts of sorcery, Malgus was a master of the singular art of violence. His power was not one of manipulation or long-term planning, but of immediate, overwhelming force. He was the embodiment of the Sith Code's declaration that passion is strength, and that strength grants power. His entire existence was a testament to this belief, a life lived in a state of perpetual, controlled rage that was channeled into becoming the most effective instrument of destruction the Sith Empire had ever produced. He was not a philosopher king or a hidden puppet master. He was a weapon, honed to a razor's edge and unleashed upon the galaxy. From his earliest days, Malgus was defined by conflict and a rejection of weakness. Born under the name Vader, he was raised by his grandfather after his parents were killed, and he quickly learned that survival depended on strength alone. He embraced the Sith teachings with a fervor that was almost religious in its intensity, seeing in the dark side a means to achieve absolute strength and purge himself of all sentiment. His passion was not an abstract concept. It was the roaring fire of his hatred, focused through the lens of his immense natural strength in the Force. He believed that the Sith Empire had grown soft, complacent, and corrupted by politics and decadence, and he saw himself as the pure expression of what a Sith should be, a warrior, unburdened by allegiance to anything but his own power and the strength of the Empire. Malgus's power was multifaceted, but every facet was geared towards combat. He was a physical specimen of terrifying prowess, immensely strong and resilient, his body hardened by a lifetime of relentless warfare. His lightsaber technique was not one of finesse or classical form, but of pure, brutal aggression. He wielded his weapon with a unique, overpowering style designed to shatter defenses through sheer force and relentless assault. He was a master of Jar-Kai, the dual-wielding technique, but often preferred to use a single blade to focus his overwhelming power. In battle, he was a whirlwind of destruction, moving with a speed and ferocity that could overwhelm entire groups of Jedi Knights. His mastery of the Force was similarly direct and devastating. He possessed immense telekinetic power, which he used not for subtle manipulation, but for explosive battlefield-altering effects. He could unleash force pushes of such magnitude that they could shatter stone fortifications and send entire squads of soldiers flying. His command of Force lightning was legendary, bolts of pure energy that he could unleash with enough power to vaporize lesser foes. Perhaps his most iconic ability was his capacity for pure, unadulterated rage. He could tap into his pain and hatred to enter a state of berserker fury, enhancing his physical abilities to superhuman levels, making him faster, stronger, and more durable, allowing him to fight on through injuries that would be mortal to any other being. The pinnacle of his power, and the act that cemented his legend, was his role in the sacking of Coruscant during the Great Galactic War. Malgus was not the architect of the plan, but he was its spearhead, its most visible and terrifying instrument. He led the assault on the Jedi Temple itself, the very heart of the Jedi Order, and in a brutal, iconic battle, he fought his way through its defenses. He famously defeated the Jedi Master Ven Zalo in a duel that showcased his perfect blend of martial skill and raw dark side power. But his actions went beyond mere dueling. He was a force of nature within the temple's halls, shattering pillars, unleashing storms of lightning, and cutting down any who stood before him. His presence was so overwhelming, his power so visibly destructive, that he became a symbol of Sith might, a living embodiment of the Empire's power to strike at the very core of the Republic. Unlike many Sith, Malgus's ambition was not for the throne itself, but for the purity of the Sith ideal. He believed that the Empire's victory required the shedding of its weakness, and he was willing to betray even his Emperor to see that vision realized. His power was ultimately his downfall, as his belief in his own strength led him to challenge the established order. Yet, even in defeat, he remained the unyielding warrior. His legacy is not one of schemes or philosophies, but of sheer, awe-inspiring destructive potential. He represents the dark side's power to forge an individual into the perfect weapon, a being whose name alone could inspire fear, and whose passage across the journey through the annals of Sith history, far beyond the familiar saga of Palpatine and Vader, reveals a tapestry of power so vast, so varied, and so terrifyingly profound that it fundamentally redefines our understanding of the dark side's true nature and its most potent practitioners. This exploration, spanning millennia and touching upon figures of cosmic hunger, unkillable pain, philosophical nihilism, sorcerous mastery, and pure martial fury, synthesizes a crucial overarching truth that Sith power is not a monolithic force, not a single note of destruction, but a complex symphony of dark potential, with each lord composing their own movement, their unique expression of what it means to wield the ultimate power of the Force's shadow self. From the strategic brilliance and dualistic mastery of Revan, who understood both the light and dark, not as enemies, but as tools to be wielded by a will strong enough to command them, to the immortal, planet-consuming hunger of Vitiate, who viewed galaxies as his personal larder, and millennia as mere stepping stones on his path to a twisted godhood. From the revolutionary intellectual power of Darth Bane, whose greatest weapon was not a lightsaber, but a perfect, self-perpetuating idea that guaranteed his victory 1,000 years after his death, to the unnatural scientific manipulation of Darth Plagueis, who sought to command the very building blocks of life and death itself, treating the Force not as a mystery, but as a science to be dissected and controlled. From the pure, conceptual annihilation represented by the triumvirate nihilus, the void that consumes; Sion, the pain that refuses to die; Tria, the will that seeks to kill the universe itself; to the ancient, sorcerous arts of Exar Kun, who mastered forgotten magics and bound his spirit to the world through an act of unparalleled betrayal; and finally, to the unyielding, brutal warrior ethos of Darth Malgus, who embodied the dark side's raw, explosive potential for violence and conquest. Each of these figures demonstrates that the legacy of the Sith is one of terrifying diversity, a spectrum of power that ranges from the subtly manipulative to the overtly apocalyptic, proving that there is no one way to master the dark side, only a multitude of paths leading to the same destination: absolute power, and the corruption that inevitably accompanies it the true legacy of the Sith. Therefore, as argued through the lives of these titans of darkness, lies not in the political machinations of a single emperor, however successful, but in the vast and terrifying foundation upon which his reign was built, a foundation poured by the hands of these earlier, often more powerful lords. Palpatine and Vader were not the architects of the Sith threat. They were its magnificent, terrifying culmination, the final, polished product of a 1,000-year-old assembly line of power, refined and perfected through the rule of two, the groundwork for their dominance, the philosophy of passion over peace, the knowledge of forbidden's rituals. The sheer, universe-bending destructive potential was laid, brick by bloody brick, by the figures discussed, by Bane's ideology, by Plagueis's research, by the raw power of the ancients that Palpatine himself undoubtedly studied and emulated, to focus solely on the Empire's reign is to admire the terrifying peak of a mountain while ignoring the immense, deep, and ancient range that gives it its height and permanence. The Sith's most enduring achievement is their relentless evolution, their ability to learn from extinction, to transform defeat into a new, more potent strategy for survival, ensuring that their darkness never truly fades, but only changes form, waiting in the shadows for its next moment to ascend. This broader, more nuanced understanding of the dark side's most powerful practitioners leaves us with a final, chilling thought, that the true nature of the Sith is not defined by a single era or a single pair of individuals, but is a perpetual evolving constant in the galaxy, a dark mirror held up to the potential for power that exists within all beings. The Lords of the Sith, in all their varied forms, from the strategist to the sorcerer to the warrior, serve as the ultimate testament to the seductive, corrupting, and ultimately self-destructive promise of the dark side, a warning that the pursuit of power for its own sake leads not to glory, but to a profound emptiness, whether it be the literal void of Nihilus, the spiritual void of Tria's philosophy, or the emotional void within Vader's mask. The most powerful Sith beyond Palpatine and Vader teach us that the dark side offers many paths to power, but all of them, in the end, lead to the same essential truth, that in seeking to control everything, one ultimately loses oneself, becoming less a master of the Force and more a prisoner of its darkest impulses, a vessel for a power that consumes all that it touches, including the one who wields it.